Chronobiology is the study of internal time clocks on the human body. Clocks in our body regulate the timing of puberty or menopause. Circadian rhythms are predictable biological variations that recur within a period of approximately 1 day. Health issues related to circadian rhythms include jet lag, shift work, seasonal depression, and time of day variations in response to medical treatments. The study of chronobiology and circadian rhythms has found that in humans, at 1 a.m., post-surgical death is most likely. At 2 a.m., peptic ulcers flare up. At 3 a.m., blood pressure bottoms out. At 4 a.m., asthma is at its worst. When you wake up, your hay fever is at its most tormenting. In the morning hours, as your blood pressure rises to meet the day, you're most likely to suffer a heart attack or stroke. Your rheumatoid arthritis improves through the day, but your osteoarthritis grows worse. Alcohol is least toxic to the body at around 5 p.m., cocktail hour. Chronobiology and circadian rhythms suggest that our optimum times to take medications and treatments and undertake certain activities. The time clocks in our body play a powerful role in our health and healing, our energy and well-being. So it's not just the clock on the wall around those phones that order our lives, when to get up, to eat, to go to work, to rest, sleep, play, whatever. It's also internal biological clocks that order our lives. When we sleep, wake up, take our meds, do that stuff. Who knew that so much of our lives was ordered by internal and external clocks? God did. He set it up that way. He appointed the times and the seasons. And it's one more reason. The book of Ecclesiastes says, all is vanity and chasing after the wind. It's a theme of chapter 1. In chapter 2, what my Bible calls the preacher, or it's translating an untranslatable word, we use the title Koheleth, who is either Solomon or someone who takes us inside Solomon's mind. He puts everything to the test and he finds that it's all meaningless. Everything is empty, fleeting, futile, absurd. Just consider the endless cycles of nature, the deficiency of our human abilities, and the passage of time. Put it to the test and see that wisdom and pleasure fail. Death is the end of the wise and the fool. We leave everything in this life behind and are eventually forgotten. Now, to add to that uplifting message, he comes to 3:1 and makes a declaration. A time for everything. A time for every event under heaven. And what follows are 14 pairs of contrasts, which then tell us about all the activities in life. It's just a sampling, but it's meant to show us and encompass all that we could do under heaven and on this earth. And the pairs could apply to many different things in life, but they basically apply to exactly what is stated. So let's just run through those pairs there in this famous chapter of Ecclesiastes 3. First pair, there's a time to give birth and a time to die. Everyone here, at the time they were born, my birthday was August 1st. I'm 60 years old. Oh boy. I didn't choose the day of my birth. My due date was October 1st. I was actually born August 1st. 2 months early, weighed 3 pounds, nearly died. They stuck me in an incubator with a heat lamp. It was 1958. That's what they did. I made it. I'm here. But you don't choose the time that you were born. And you don't choose the time that you die. The number of our days, they're out there. We've made it to maybe, 15 or 50 or 99. But these things we don't know about. They're in the hands of God. Time to be born, a time to die. Second pair, there's a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. Now, we all understand that in our part of the country, you got to plant in the spring and harvest in the fall. If you do anything other than that, you're not going to get a crop. But even though there is a time to plant, you don't control that. Planting depends upon warmer weather. We've got to wait until that last frost. You know, I think it was 2 years ago, we planted garden early in May. Bang, May 20th, we had a hard freeze and it killed half of the stuff in there. So you don't really choose the day that you plant. You've got to watch the weather and then you stick it in the ground and hope for the best. And uprooting it, well, what you hope is that it grows through August into September and gives you all these good vegetables. By the way, we brought some vegetables. There were some out on the counter if you want some squash and some, what was it, cucumbers? You got one there. That was Larry Boy waving to us all. But you don't control when you uproot those plants either. It depends upon the weather. You could have a dry spell. There could be really wet. There could be pests, all kinds of things. So you got to uproot it earlier. Farmers in southwest Minnesota, way too much rain. We drove down there, big pockets of it's been flooded out. They have to replant. You don't control this stuff. It really lies in the hand of God. The next pair, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. And that could apply to lots of things. There's maybe a time to kill your livestock. Sounds kind of awful, but that's why you're raising beef cattle or pork, hogs, chickens. Anybody raise chickens for fryers or just for the eggs? Okay. There's also a time to heal. They get injured, and so you bandage them up. It's not time. They haven't put on enough weight, But what this really applies to is human activity. So that there is a time to kill. And you say, well, when is that? Well, it's during a time of war. There might be capital punishment, criminal punishment, where there's an execution. A time to heal. As long as medicine can do its trick, we'll try all kinds of medicines, won't we, and treatments until maybe they're exhausted. I don't know. But understand again, we're not in full control of this either. Who can control when a war might break out or someone on death row, they set the sentence and they appeal and it goes on for... You just don't know these kinds of things. Next pair, there's a time to tear down and a time to build up. I mean, you could apply that to reputations or relationships, a time to build it up, make it stronger, a time that it's gotten torn down, I don't know. But here again, it literally applies to, tearing down a fence, tearing down a building, and there's a time to build it up. And just think now, you're not fully in control of that. It depends upon finances, doesn't it? It may be a tear down because of a natural disaster, an earthquake, a fire, a tornado. And then you got to rebuild it up. You don't control all of those things. So much of it is in the hand of God. Verse 4, you've got a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. They kind of go together. And sometimes we plan a celebration or something, but a lot of times these come as unexpected. Either they're unpleasant, we get the bad news. Did you hear that this person was in an accident? Did you hear about, my old uncle who passed away? Oh, I didn't know, and it comes as unexpected bad news to us. Or it's good news. Hey, the baby was born, yay, Oh, they're getting married. My son and his girlfriend have been engaged for 3 years. They've been talking about setting a date, and I think finally they set a date. June 8th, 2019. Well, we'll believe it when we see it. But, we don't control all this stuff when we're gonna sing and celebrate and dance, and when we're gonna mourn and weep. We're responding to events in our lives that we don't control. It says there's a next pair, a time to throw stones, time to gather stones. Ancient rabbis understood these phrases, to throw stones and gather stones, to refer to sexual activity. So when you were throwing stones, you were having sex, and when you were when you were gathering stones, you were abstaining. And that sounds weird to us, but what do we say? We say, are you sleeping together? Are you having sex? Oh, no, we are not sleeping together. no sex. So we use euphemism. That's one thing. But you have to understand, it really applies to what is literally being described here. There was a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. Time to scatter stones. An invading army would come in and defeat the people. So to make sure they couldn't plant crops, they'd heave stones in there. Or they'd knock down a wall, or they'd knock down buildings. They had no control over that. What do you got to do? Well, to plant your field, you got to go out and gather up all the stones. Or the fence that was knocked down, you got to get the stones, gather them up, and build up the wall or the building. It's what happens. It says there's a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. So if throwing stones and gathering stones was a euphemism for sexual relations, you can see how it fits with embracing and shunning embracing. But there is a time to embrace. Maybe there's a great victory. Ooh, we won the big game, and everybody's hugging. You're hugging strangers and you win a big game. That's a weird thing, but you're all rooting for the same team, so you hug. Or you hug because of a close friendship. Or when Mark was baptized, he and Aaron shared a big wet hug back there. It was beautiful. There's other time to shun hugging. You're ticked off at somebody. You're not going to give them a hug until, you've worked this thing through. Or maybe it's a terrible defeat. Your team lost, like the Vikings have 4 times in the Super Bowl. Don't go hugging me, man. Get away from me. And again, we don't control those events, do we? They come to us sometimes unexpectedly, times to hug, times not to hug. It's in the hands of God. Another pair here. There's a time to search and a time to give up as lost. You ever lose something valuable? Oh, you search high and low. You lose a diamond ring or your engagement ring. You don't search very long for a paper clip. You'll get another one of those. But when you search, you think, oh, if I only were to search a little longer, maybe I would have found it. Or you say, why did I waste so much time looking for that? But there's times where we're searching. There's times where we give it up. And we don't control that. How do you know if you're going to find, even if it's a valuable item? It's in the hands of God. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. We tend to keep stuff that is valuable to us. It might be sentimental to us, or we think we're going to use it someday. And you know what happens? I keep something for a long time, this little thingamajig, and I say, I don't need it. I throw it away. The next week, I wish I had that thingamajig. Why did I throw it out? And then we do that. And if we're not the ones who throw it out, someone coming along after us is going to say, well, this isn't sentimental to me, this postcard or this thing. I'm going to throw it out. There's a time to tear apart and a time to sew together. Ancient rabbis understood this to be possibly a response to grief and mourning. You got bad news. In the ancient world, you would tear your garment to express your shock and horror. What we do sometimes is dress in black. That's when we express that we're mourning. Well, they would go, oh, I can't believe it. And then, of course, when the time of mourning was done, they would stitch the garment and fix it up. And that may be, but it really refers to just any garment that gets worn out. You can't wear it anymore, but it's got some good places. You cut it up and you use it to patch the new garment that you got. So there's a time to tear apart, a time to sew together. Time to be silent, time to speak. They thought that may have been also during a time of mourning. Jews had a period where they mourned and they were silent for hours or days. When the mourning was done, then they could speak again. That may be. But it simply refers again to the fact that there are times when it is better not to speak. It's inappropriate. It would be out of place. And there's other times where it's inappropriate or out of place not to speak. And again, we don't always control that, do we? Walk into a situation, well, what should I say? Or maybe I should say nothing. Another pair, verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate. And that's a hard one for us because we know we're supposed to love. But again, what we're talking about here is events that bring a response to us. And so, yes, we're supposed to choose to love, but sometimes the love just comes within us. Somebody we know and love comes, oh, come here, and it's love. But sometimes we hear something very bad, and hatred rises within us. When you read a terrible headline about some terrorist attack or I don't know, have you heard about the compound where these adults were and they were mistreating the kids? And I mean, you don't want that hate to linger, but it's certainly, you go, really loathe what they do. There's a time to love, there's a time to hate. It just happens to us, it comes to us. A time for war and a time for peace. And of course we're to be peacemakers and we're to seek peace, but here again, there are events that happen. And it brings about war. We can't control that. And we hope for peace and we pray for peace, but a lot of times there's negotiation. It drags on for weeks, months, maybe even years. We don't know when peace is coming. See, he writes this list here to let us know that a time for everything under the sun. Here they are, all these activities. And guess what? We don't control them. These things are in the hand of God. God sets a time for every human activity. And so now he's going to draw some conclusions from this. Look at verse 9. He asks the question, what profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? So given that there's just these times and we're just responding to the times in which we live, just doing what the times dictate to us, what's the point of all our activity? What's the gain? He tells us what he's seen, verse 10. I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He's reminding us, he observed very carefully what human beings did in their lives under the sun, what he did. And he's asking, what's the point to it? And this is the first part of his answer. He has made everything appropriate in its time. The best that the writer of Ecclesiastes does is point us to God. And here's one of those places. Bible teachers debate what that term appropriate means. It might mean beautiful, appropriate, proper. But it suggests that God is behind it. And when the time comes, he puts events in our lives that bring forth all of these different activities. And he has also set eternity in their heart. Again, Bible teachers debate. What does that mean? It's literally the word forever. So they think it's the idea that he has placed in human beings the awareness of the future. So we think about what's going to happen in the days to come. And we try to prepare for that the best we can. But no matter what we do, there's all these contingencies, all these things that we never expected that happen, that occur. We don't control that. So that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. God can see the big picture, beginning to end. We only see a slice of it. And so what we see happening in our lives, we go, what the heck? Why is this happening? We don't understand why bad things happen. We can't see from beginning to end. And it confuses us. All the death and all the destruction, all the poverty, all the abuse, all the hurt. To us, it looks like a mess. But again, this is a word that gives us a bit of hope. It's in God's hands. And we can't see it, but he sees beginning from the end. God makes a time for every human activity. We cannot fathom his plan. Now, the discussion of God's sovereignty and human free will has been going on a long time. And we can't solve that this morning. I've already talked too long the way it is to get into that one. But if you were an atheistic materialist, that is, you only believed in atoms and matter and energy and stuff you could get your hands on, you might hear some of them say, all that we do is simply determined. We're just animals or machines who, the atoms are rattling around inside our mind and all of this and, our DNA and everything inside of us now simply determines our response. We really don't have free will. And if you were a Christian and what we would call a hyper-Calvinist, and if you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. It simply refers to someone who is very much into the sovereignty of God and he controls everything. You'd kind of come out at the same place, except there would be God, and he simply controls everything that you do. Most of us come down someplace in the middle. God's in control, but we still have free will. And I'll give you my thinking here for what it's worth. When I think of God's control and human free will, I think of a river. And the river has banks, so there are boundaries. We can't just do anything. But we're inside this river, and we've got free will. We can swim with the current. We can swim sideways for a while. We can even swim against the current. But the river will flow to the ocean. Ultimately, God's will be done. I may go my own way and do my own things, but that's not going to change the will of God or his work. Right? Now, you got to sort that out in your life. God's in control, and yet we're free moral agents. Right? But you can see where Ecclesiastes comes down. God's in control. And what he gives us in life is events, times where events occur that we have to respond to. So again, time to be born, time to die. We didn't choose when we were born. We didn't choose when we were going to die. Now, we can induce labor today, right? So we can kind of make it close. Okay, we're going to do this. You're going to have this baby. We're going to do a C-section. But even then, they don't know how long a person's going to be in labor, how long the C-section is going to take. They cannot predict the moment of birth, nor can the moment of death. We might have someone who says, well, I'm terminally ill, and I'm going to choose this date and have a suicide, a doctor-assisted suicide, picking the time and even the moment. But understand, they've got a terminal illness. If they wouldn't have had a deep depression or a terminal cancer, they never would have made the decision to die. So ultimately, it's not in their control. See, there are factors beyond their control that say, well, I'm going to choose this date and have a doctor help me. The point is that we cannot choose the moment of our death either. There are factors that may force us to do certain things or that may limit the time in which something occurs, but we don't choose it. It's beyond our control. Same thing with the time to plant and the time to uproot what is planted. We talked about that. We got to wait until the weather conditions are right and hope that we don't get a flood or a drought or whatever and the pests aren't too bad. Time to kill, a time to heal. We know that's true. If you've got a pet, you know that you would do whatever you could to heal that pet. Fluffy gets a cut on his leg, or Fluffy has something wrong, and we'll take him to the surgeon and pay thousands of dollars to have surgery on a dog or a cat or whatever. But there also comes a time when you got to let Fluffy go. Though Fluffy has to die. And it's sad, but there's a time to kill, a time to heal. And even amongst human beings, times of war, capital punishment, anytime we're sick, we're going to do everything we can to heal. But sometimes you got to pull the plug, right? You ever been in that decision, in that situation? Oh, there's the heart's beating, but there's no brain activity. What would your family like to do? Oh, man. It's hard to know. Time to live, time to heal. Time to tear down, time to build up. Chippewa Falls is a good example of that. If you entered from the south on Highway 124, up on Bridge Street, what do you see? They tore down buildings and made a beautiful park. And then they put up a new Chamber of Commerce building, new SEH building, Cobblestone Hotel and Suites, and that Chop House. I mean, it is a great entrance to Chippewa Falls. They had to tear down a bunch of stuff to get it up, but that's what we do. And we didn't necessarily choose all that. They had to get financing. They had to go through all kinds of rules and regulations, and there you go. Time to weep, time to laugh, time to mourn, time to dance. Just yesterday, there was a wedding in this building. It was quite a surprise to all of us. There were some people who attended church in the past. Their son needed to get married, had set the date, and things fell through, and they said, can you do it? And so, yeah, we had a wedding here, celebrating. It was wonderful. Times when you have to go to a funeral. I talked to one of the family members, and I said, yeah, isn't it strange how, about the only time all your family comes together is when there's a wedding or a funeral. And he said, yeah. We just had a funeral for an old uncle that passed away recently, and, someone else was getting married, and, these events happen. You can hardly control it. Time to throw stones and gather stones. I know about this one. I know about gathering stones and scattering stones. Lori announced that we needed to get rid of the stones around our landscaping. And I put my foot down. I said, no. This is too much expense, too much work. No. I looked out the window, and Lori's shoveling rocks into a wheelbarrow. Well, now I can't let my wife do all this work by herself. So what did we do? We gathered up all those stones and scattered them out back in the pasture, and we put down wood chips. The wood chips, however, they fade in the sun, they decompose, so after 2-3 years of wood chips, no more wood chips. We need stones. And we put stones back in. We gathered and scattered and gathered and scattered, and I had no control over that one, my friends. Time to embrace and shun embracing. Search, a time to give up as lost. You can see all those. Time to love, time to hate. I want to hit those again. Jesus tells us to love even our enemies, and we know that's right, and we shouldn't hate. But I really love the comedian Bill Cosby. But when I begin to learn, what he did with women, drugged them and abused them, there was some hatred that rose up within me. And if it didn't rise up within you, then something's wrong with you, because this was terrible stuff. Or did you read about Dr. Larry Nassar? He was the doctor who abused hundreds of young girl gymnasts. It was awful. And again, I'm no proponent of hatred, but that guy and what he did to all those young girls for at least a little time, I loathed that man. And it's up to those girls, however, to deal with that, hopefully forgive, and we all have to forgive. But you understand what he's saying here. There are situations out there where you're not human with a sense of justice if there isn't a sense of anger and even hatred that rises in you for what is being done to people. And of course, we ultimately have to choose to love, even our enemies. And it's so much easier to love people we know, but we're surprised by love as well. If somebody does something really nice to you, oh, Pastor, here's a card for you, and all these, oh, thank you, you love me, thank you. It's beautiful, but you're surprised by those things. Time for war, time for peace. We don't choose that. We didn't choose that they flew planes into our buildings. And what are you going to do when people are flying planes and knocking down buildings and killing thousands? There's got to be some kind of response. And we can debate if, the response that happened in the aftermath of all that. But the truth is, the reality now is that we have been at war with Al-Qaeda or ISIS or some terrorist groups ourselves for decades now. And we don't control that. We want times of peace, yes, but who knows how that's going to work out when it comes. The point is simply this: God sets the times that events happen. And you and I are primarily responding to those events. We're not in control. God is. God makes a time for every human activity. We cannot fathom his plan. So what do we draw from this? Well, if we listen to the author of Ecclesiastes, he says, makes it all futility. Just look at what we do, everything under the sun. We're working all these activities, and it's mainly just a response to what's going on around us. The good times, the bad times, the happy times, the sad times, lose stuff, find stuff, all this stuff. It's just, we're responding to what God brings our way. The one piece of hope he gives us in saying that he makes it beautiful. And we don't see that. Our perspective is too narrow. We might live 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, but it's just a little slice of the beginning to the end. So, we're children of the times in which we live. If we had been born or if we had lived during the 1800s, it's very possible that some of us here would have been slaveholders or slaves. If we would have lived during the times of the Great Depression, the chances are that most of us would have been dirt poor. We would have been in poverty, grinding poverty like we have never known. And we live today in a time of unprecedented technological and medical and industrial advances. I mean, I grew up, and I kid you not, I would go out and people were not doing this. You go out today, you go anywhere today, you go to church, and I guarantee there are a dozen people right now doing this on their phone. They can't put down their phone. We are children of the age in which we live. See? And that's what God does. We were born, whether you're a baby boomer or what, Generation X or a millennial or whatever, you're a child of the times. And the only hope we have, the only glimmer of hope here is we got to trust that God makes it good. Because what we're going to see in this little span of time that we live, some good times, some bad times, some happy times, some sad times. We're going to lose stuff, we're going to find stuff, we're going to build stuff, we're going to tear it down. You know, there's going to be war, there's going to be peace. All that we're going to do is going to be undone over and over again. It could be quite depressing. And we could end up like Kohelet saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanities. We, on the other hand, will hang on to this side that says, my God is in control. And somehow, from his vantage point, he makes it beautiful, appropriate, and proper in its time. God makes a time for every human activity. We cannot fathom his plan because of Jesus Christ. It's in his name we pray. Amen.